this is a segment that I'm very excited about us doing throughout the year, because I think it has a chance, one, to make, we're the gurus, right? We're the experts. We're supposed to know everything that's going on. We'll see about that. So this one right now, because I don't have a better name for it, we're calling it Predict a Commit. And so what we're going to do is every episode, I know a lot of people listening to this say, okay, yeah, this is great. We're talking recruiting. We want more recruiting info, but who's Georgia going to sign? Who's going to end up being in Georgia's recruiting class? And so what Jordan and I are going to do is every episode, we are each going to pick a guy that we think ends up signing with Georgia. And we're not going to revisit it every single episode. We're going to pick our guy. We're going to talk about why we're picking that guy. And then we're going to keep a running tally of it. And at the end of the year, when we do our end of year episode, hopefully that has a lot of the signees on it, like we did this past year, we're going to see and revisit who had some great choices, who had some bad choices, which I'm sure there will be a little bit of both. Jordan, we're always, we'll add this caveat, we're always going to pick different guys within the same episode. But if I pick someone this episode, next episode, Jordan could pick that guy as well. So there will be some overlap between our lists when we get to the end of the year. But Jordan, I'll give you the courtesy of starting here.
You're giving me the right of first refusal here. I'm going to take you back to June, Ben, and I'm going to take you back to June 6th. There was a kid that committed to Georgia, and we wrote about him. And it was like, okay, Georgia's got this commit. And then 4 days later, he was not committed. They felt like that decision had been a little rushed. Maybe that was not in the best interest of this kid. But I will say that this is a happy ending for the Georgia Bulldogs. My first pick, Derrek Cooper, running back. I think he might be a 5-star with the composite 6'1", 195. I'm going to pick Derrek Cooper as my first predicted commit. I think that all's well that ends well. I'll let you talk about him, Ben, but I'll pull up his profile so folks can see it. But I think ultimately Derrek Cooper does wind up being a Georgia Bulldog.
I love that pick. He was not on my radar for this first pick, and now I kind of wish that he had been. I will also say, as a little tease for some of the things we'll talk about on the next edition of this, I'm sure he is scheduled to be at the February 1st junior day that Georgia has as well. So going in line with guys that will be at junior days and the high rate of signature, I think that's a great pick. Like you mentioned, he did commit to Georgia publicly. He put out a graphic last June. He and his family ultimately decided that it was just too quick for that decision, but that has not changed anything when it comes to his relationship with Georgia, specifically with running backs coach Josh Crawford. He is very high up on the wish list for Georgia this cycle. And like we said, anytime an out-of-state guy is getting on a junior day visit, he is a big-time target for Georgia. Him and Savion Hyder, who's another out-of-state running back that's a big-time national recruit. Those are the two guys that are expected to be on that visit on February 1st, and I think getting one of those two guys in this class will be crucial for Josh Crawford's running back group this cycle.
Yeah, I'll shout out to bring this back up earlier. We had a comment from a Kip A. Don't know who that could have been, but his question was, do you see Georgia maybe taking 3 running backs in this class?
I could. A lot of it ends up with that type of stuff ends up depending on what do you feel like you have leaving. And this year was a perfect example where I think Georgia started to think that Trevor Etienne was going to stick around. And so it changed the math a little bit on who they thought that they were going to take out of high school, how many they thought they were going to take out of high school. And I don't think that they necessarily were planning to take a running back out of the portal, but I think the timing of it, where it was initially reported that he was going to leave or stay at Georgia, and the sentiment was that he was likely going to stay at Georgia. And then in between that, and when he ends up declaring for the NFL draft, Micah Bell ends up signing with Georgia out of the transfer portal as well. So I'm not saying that Micah Bell was a direct relationship where it was Georgia learned that Etienne was leaving, let's try and find somebody else to bring in at the position. But those types of things do happen. And so you don't know right now 100% where, and I know it's a tough thing to say, and I'm not in any way suggesting that I think any of these guys are going to be playing anywhere other than Georgia, but like Nate Frazier, Chauncey Bowens, Dwight Phillips, Roderick Robinson, Branson Robinson, like guys that are on Georgia's roster at running back right now. At this time next year, you cannot say with an absolute certainty that they're going to be going pro or not going pro, that they're going to be hitting the transfer portal or not hitting the transfer portal. So naturally, you want to take 1 to 2 backs every cycle. Georgia will probably want to take 2 backs this cycle. That math can change depending on who you've got coming back or who you think's leaving. And again, that's all part of recruiting and retention and building those relationships and figuring that out over the course of the recruiting cycle. And so they could take 3. There were points in time during last cycle where I thought they might take 3 and they ended up taking 1. So it depends, but I think 2 is a very safe bet. I mean, we've already mentioned on this show, they've got 3 in-state guys coming in on visits this weekend. They've got those 2 out-of-state guys coming in on visits on February 1st. I mean, that's 5 running backs that they already feel strongly about, that they're already getting on campus. And so I think you can already sort of start to zero in on who are the targets Georgia is going to be leaning towards in this class.
All right, Ben, let's hear your predict to commit.
All right, I'm going to go with a name that I have not written as much about, but when I've started doing some of this digging through sources and stuff with junior days and figuring out who was going to be there and who's not going to be there, one name came up as someone that I need to put more attention on than I have been. And you want to talk about nipping the Buford curse straight from the top? I am going to go with offensive lineman Graham Houston. He's an interior offensive lineman that could probably flex and play some tackle. He's played, from my understanding, all 5 spots at one point in time in his Buford career. He visited for a couple games in the fall. He will be back for the junior day on Saturday. He's not the only offensive lineman. In fact, I was considering taking one of 2 offensive linemen, and you might be able to draw some conclusions who my other might have been based on some other stuff that we've talked about on this show. But Graham Houston is going to be my first predict to commit. I don't know how soon it will happen. I don't know that anything is happening imminently, but I have just learned over the last few days, this is a guy that Georgia really, really feels like it needs to get and that it wants to sign. And anytime that there is an in-state offensive lineman, I mean, just look at the last cycle. Georgia just signed 5 linemen from the state of Georgia. Anytime there is an in-state offensive lineman that Georgia really wants, typically Georgia ends up signing him.
6'5", 305. If you are listening to the podcast, we've got his profile pulled up on YouTube. Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be impressed with that. Needing more depth there at offensive tackle. I knew that I was not well prepared for this game with the recruiting guy, but I really like this pick, Ben. I think Graham Houston's a name that Georgia fans should keep an eye on. And I know that a lot of folks have asked Colton Houston. Do we know if there's any sort of relation there with him and Graham?
I have asked that question and I haven't gotten an answer. I'll probably talk to Graham, I would assume, after this weekend, and I will get a final answer on that, and we'll give you an update because I've wondered the same thing.